The night sky over Baghdad erupted in streaks of fire and thunder. Cruise missiles tore through the darkness, their contrails illuminating the Tigris River like falling stars. In the presidential palace complex, the chandeliers swayed with each distant explosion. Saddam Hussein stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the American shock and awe campaign unfold with an expression that bordered on theatrical disdain. "Let them come," he muttered to his inner circle, gathered in the ornate war room beneath marble columns and portraits of Mesopotamian warriors. "Let them taste the sand and blood of Iraq." His generals nodded, though some exchanged uneasy glances. Intelligence reports from the Republican Guard commanders in the South painted a different picture than the one Saddam wanted to hear. The Americans weren't just bombing from the sky. They were moving. Fast. Colonel Qusay al-Dakriti, commander of the Baghdad Division's 10th Armored Brigade, stood before a tactical map dotted with red markers representing coalition forces. "Sayyid President," he began cautiously, "our scouts report American columns crossing the Kuwaiti border. M1 Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, Apache helicopters. They're advancing in 3 main axes." Saddam waved his hand dismissively. "Tanks in the desert? We destroyed the Persians with less. We held the Americans in 91. These are the same machines, Colonel. Old technology wrapped in new propaganda." But Qusay knew better. He'd read the classified assessments from Russian military advisors who'd studied Desert Storm. The Abrams wasn't just a tank. It was a weapons platform designed to operate in conditions that would cripple Soviet-era armor. Its turbine engine could sustain speeds over 60 kilometers per hour across open desert. Its depleted uranium armor could withstand direct hits from T-72 main guns. Its thermal imaging could identify targets in total darkness at ranges exceeding 3 kilometers. "Sayyid President," Qusay pressed, "these are not the tanks of 1991. They have been upgraded. Their crews are trained in—" "Enough!" Saddam's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You sound like an American journalist. Do you forget who won the mother of all battles? We burned their vehicles in the desert. We made them beg for ceasefires. This time, they will drown in the Euphrates before they see the towers of Baghdad." Outside, the rumble of B-52 strikes continued. Somewhere in the southern marshlands, near Basra, Iraqi conscripts huddled in bunkers as 2,000-pound dams turned their command posts into craters. The regime's propaganda machine broadcasted messages of defiance on state television. Saddam firing rifles into the air, claims of American planes shot down, promises that the Republican Guard would slaughter the invaders. But 300 kilometers south, reality was already colliding with myth. Kuwait border, March 20th, 2003, 0400 hours. Captain Jake Hendricks stood in the commander's hatch of his M1A1 Abrams, call sign Reaper 6, and watched the horizon glow orange with artillery fire. The 3rd Infantry Division's 2nd Brigade combat team was staging for the push into Iraq, and the scale of the operation was staggering. As far as he could see, columns of armored vehicles stretched into the darkness. Abrams tanks, Bradley IFVs, M113 APCs, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and Humvees bristling with .50 cal machine guns. The air smelled of diesel, hydraulic fluid, and anticipation. "All Reaper elements, this is Reaper 6. Hendricks spoke into his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "We cross the line of departure in 20 minutes. Stay tight, watch your spacing, and remember your training. This is not a drill." Inside the turret, his gunner, Sergeant Luis Martinez, adjusted the thermal imaging system and checked the 120 millimeters main gun's ammunition load. "Sabo rounds loaded, sir. Heat rounds on standby. Cokes is hot." "Good," Hendricks replied. "We're going to need every round." His loader, Specialist Devin Clark, a 22-year-old from Alabama, slapped the armored side of the turret. "Let's get this done, Captain. My girl's waiting for me back in Fort Stewart." Hendricks didn't respond. He'd been in the Army long enough to know that some promises couldn't be kept. Instead, he pulled out a laminated map and reviewed the route. Highway 8, straight through the desert, bypassing Basra, then northwest toward Nazariya, Najaf, Karbala, and finally Baghdad. 700 kilometers of enemy territory. The plan was simple in theory. speed and violence of action, bypass strong points, destroy armor concentrations, seize key bridges, and reach Baghdad before the Iraqis could organize a coherent defense. It was a gamble, a logistical nightmare, and a tactical revolution. The old doctrine of slow, methodical advances was being replaced by thunder runs, high-speed armored thrusts deep into enemy territory. "Captain," Martinez called out, "thermals picking up movement. 10 o'clock, 2 kilometers." Hendricks swung his night vision binoculars toward the bearing. Through the green haze, he saw them. Iraqi border outposts, sandbag bunkers, maybe a platoon's worth of conscripts. They were firing sporadically into the night, unaware of the steel avalanche about to roll over them. "Ignore them," Hendricks ordered. "Higher wants us moving fast. Apache gunships will clean them up. We're going for the big game, Republican Guard." At precisely 0420 hours, the order came through. "All units," this is Hammer Actual, "execute, execute, execute." The desert exploded with sound. Hundreds of engines roared to life. Tank treads bit into sand. Radio nets crackled with status reports. And like a tidal wave of steel, the U.S. Army surged across the border into Iraq. Hendricks keyed his mic. "Reaper elements, move out. Let's go find Saddam's tanks." Baghdad, March 21st, 2003. Saddam convened another meeting. This time in a bunker deep beneath the presidential palace. The walls were reinforced concrete, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and tension. Maps of Iraq covered the tables, marked with units that existed more on paper than in reality. "The Americans are moving faster than anticipated," admitted General Izzat Ibrahim al-Duri, vice chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council. "Our southern defenses are encountering difficulties." "Difficulties?" Saddam's eyes narrowed. "Speak plainly, General." "Basra is surrounded. The 51st Mechanized Division has lost communication. Reports indicate American armor is bypassing our strong points entirely. They are not fighting as we expected. They are running." Saddam slammed his fist on the table. "Running where? To their deaths? Deploy the Republican Guard. Send the Medina Division south. Crush them in the open desert, where our T-72s have room to maneuver." Colonel Kusai, present again despite his earlier dismissal, dared to interject. "Sayyid President, the Medina Division is positioned to defend Baghdad. If we send them south, then send the Hammurabi Division. Send Fadayin. Send anyone who can hold a rifle." Saddam's voice rose. "I want those American tanks burning in the sand. I want their crews captured on television. I want the world to see that Iraq does not bow." But even as he spoke, the first engagement between American and Iraqi armor was already underway, and it was nothing like the battles of 1991. Near Nazariya, March 23, 2003, 1,130 hours. Captain Hendricks' tank platoon had been on the move for 3 days straight, covering nearly 400 kilometers with minimal rest. The crew was exhausted, surviving on MREs, energy drinks, and adrenaline. Dust coated everything. The heat inside the tank was oppressive despite the ventilation systems. "Movement ahead," Martinez announced. "Thermal signature. Looks like 9 vehicles. T-72s. Hendricks immediately went alert. This was it. The first real tank-on-tank engagement. All Reaper elements. Contact front. Enemy armor. Bearing 350. Range 3,000 meters. Weapons free. The Abrams' fire control system was a masterpiece of technology. The gunner lays a target. The ballistic computer calculated wind, temperature, and projectile drop, and the stabilized gun could fire accurately even while moving at speed. The Iraqi T-72s, by contrast, relied on outdated optics and manual range estimation. Target locked. Martinez said, "Fire." The 120 millimeters gun roared, the entire tank rocking back from the recoil. Downrange, 3,000 meters away, a T-72 exploded in a fountain of fire and shrapnel. The depleted uranium sabot round had punched through the Soviet-designed armor like paper, detonating the ammunition stored inside the turret. Target destroyed. Engaging next. The battle lasted less than 4 minutes. 9 T-72s obliterated. 0 American casualties. The Iraqi crews never even saw their attackers. The Abrams tanks had engaged from beyond the effective range of Iraqi guns, using thermal sights to fire through the midday heat haze. As the smoke cleared, Hendricks surveyed the wreckage through his binoculars. Burning hulks, bodies scattered in the sand, survivors stumbling away, uniforms on fire. "Jesus," Clark whispered. "Stay focused." Hendricks snapped. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." But in that moment, something had shifted. The myth of Iraqi armed resistance had just died in the desert. And in Baghdad, Saddam Hussein would soon learn that his paper tigers had met the steel fangs of American armor, and the fangs had won. The morning sun climbed over the Euphrates River Valley, casting long shadows across the palm groves and date orchards south of Baghdad. For the soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division's 2nd Brigade Combat Team, the landscape had become a blur of villages, checkpoints, and ambush sites. They'd fought their way from Kuwait to the outskirts of Saddam's capital in just 16 days, a pace that military historians would later compare to Patton's race across France. But now, at the gates of Baghdad, the real test awaited. Lieutenant Colonel Eric Schwartz stood in the command tent at Forward Operating Base Ripper, studying aerial reconnaissance photos spread across a folding table. The images showed Baghdad's southern approaches. Multi-lane highways choked with civilian traffic, overpasses fortified with anti-aircraft guns, and clusters of Iraqi armor dug into defensive positions around government buildings. "Sir," said Major Tom Riley, the brigade's operations officer, "Intel reports the Republican Guard's Medina Division has repositioned along Highway 8. Estimates put them at 15 T-72s, multiple BMPs, and dismounted infantry with RPGs. They know we're coming." Schwartz rubbed his jaw, exhaustion evident in his bloodshot eyes. "They don't know when. That's our advantage. We hit them tomorrow morning, 0600 hours. Full brigade assault. Abrams lead elements. Bradley's in overwatch. Artillery prep fires on known positions." "Thunder Run?" Riley asked. Schwartz nodded. "Thunder Run. Straight up Highway 8, through their defenses, into the heart of Baghdad. We prove that Iraqi armor can't stop us. We break their will." The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. A Thunder Run meant charging a heavy armored column directly into an urban center controlled by enemy forces, essentially inviting ambushes, RPG attacks, and close-quarters combat in an environment where tanks were vulnerable. But the psychological impact would be devastating. If American armor could roll through Baghdad with impunity, the regime's days were numbered. Captain Jake Hendricks received the order that night via encrypted radio. "Reaper 6, this is Hammer Actual. You're on point tomorrow. First tanks into Baghdad. Think you can handle it?" Hendricks felt his stomach tighten. "Roger that, sir. Reaper elements are ready." "Good, because the whole world's watching. And so is Saddam." Baghdad, April 5th, 2003, 0200 hours. Colonel Qusay al-Takriti hadn't slept in 4 days. He stood on the rooftop of a government building overlooking Highway 8, watching his soldiers prepare defensive positions. T-72 tanks were dug into revetments, their turrets pointed south. Republican Guard infantry manned heavy machine guns behind sandbag barriers. Civilian buses had been positioned across the highway as makeshift roadblocks. "Will it be enough?" asked Lieutenant Hamid, a young officer fresh from the military academy. Qusay didn't answer immediately. He'd seen the reports from the south. Entire divisions routed, tanks destroyed from impossible distances, American aircraft operating without opposition. The regime's propaganda claimed victories. But Qusay knew the truth. They were losing. Badly. "It doesn't matter if it's enough," Qusay finally said. "This is Baghdad. The Americans expect us to fold. We prove them wrong here, or we prove them right. There's no middle ground." He checked his sidearm, a 9mm Taurus pistol, and scanned the darkened highway. Somewhere out there, in the pre-dawn blackness, American armor was assembling for the assault. Qusay had studied their tactics. They would come fast, using speed to negate Iraqi numerical advantages. They would rely on superior optics, precision fires, and overwhelming firepower. But Qusay had advantages too. Urban terrain, ambush positions, and soldiers who knew that retreat meant execution by Saddam's Hussein. "Lieutenant," Kusai said quietly, "when they come, don't hesitate. Fire everything. Aim for the treads, the optics, the hatches. Even if we can't destroy them, we slow them down. We make them bleed." Hamid swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." At 0530 hours, the horizon to the south flickered with artillery flashes. The Americans were beginning their preparatory fires. Highway 8, April 5, 2003, 0600 hours. Captain Hendricks' Abrams roared to life, the turbine engine whining like a jet preparing for takeoff. Around him, 14 other tanks and 24 Bradley fighting vehicles formed up in assault formation. The plan was simple: punch through the Iraqi defenses at maximum speed, suppress resistance with overwhelming firepower, and reach the center of Baghdad before the enemy could organize a coherent response. All Reaper elements, this is Reaper 6, we're moving in 60 seconds. Stay on my 6, maintain interval, and do not stop for anything. If you get hit, the vehicle behind you renders aid. Understood. A chorus of acknowledgments crackled through the radio net. Hendricks glanced at his crew. Martinez hunched over the gunner's sight, fingers hovering over the weapon controls. Clark checked the ammunition ready rack for the 100th time. The driver, Specialist Mike Ortiz, a stoic Texan with 2 combat tours under his belt, adjusted his night vision goggles. "Ready, sir," Ortiz said. "Then let's go introduce ourselves to Baghdad." The column surged forward, gathering speed as it hit the open highway. Within seconds, they were traveling at 40 miles per hour, a speed unthinkable for armor formations in previous wars. The Abrams' suspension absorbed the bumps and potholes, the thermal sight scanning for threats. "Contact," Martinez shouted. T-72, 11 o'clock, 800 meters. "Fire," Hendricks ordered. The main gun bucked, the sabot round streaking downrange in a fraction of a second. The Iraqi tank exploded, its turret flipping through the air like a toy. But immediately, more targets appeared. RPG teams emerging from buildings, machine gun positions opening up from overpasses, a second T-72 pivoting its turret toward them. "Engage! Engage!" Hendricks yelled. The next 15 minutes were chaos. The Abrams column blasted through the Iraqi defenses like a wrecking ball. Coaxial machine guns tore apart infantry positions. Main gun rounds obliterated bunkers. Apache helicopters overhead fired Hellfire missiles at targets of opportunity. The sheer violence was overwhelming, but the Iraqis fought back. RPGs screamed out of alleyways, clanging off tank armor. A Bradley took a direct hit, flames erupting from its rear hatch. Hendricks saw soldiers bailing out, dragging wounded comrades to cover as medics rushed forward under fire. "Keep moving." Schwartz's voice boomed over radio. "Do not stop. Push through." Hendricks grit his teeth and keyed his mic. Reaper 6 is past the first checkpoint, taking fire from all sides but advancing. Baghdad streets, 0645 hours. Colonel Kusai watched the American column smash through his defenses with horrifying efficiency. His T-72s were dying before they could even acquire targets. His infantry was being shredded by machine gun fire. The roadblocks were being pushed aside like cardboard. "Fall back," he screamed into his radio. "All units, fall back to secondary positions." But there was nowhere to fall back to. The Americans weren't stopping to consolidate ground. They were just driving straight through, their tanks moving faster than Iraqi forces could reposition. It was a nightmare scenario, something Kusai had only read about in after-action reports from Desert Storm. Lieutenant Hamid crouched behind a concrete barrier, clutching an RPG launcher. "Sir, what do we do?" Kusai looked at the young officer, saw the terror in his eyes, and felt something inside him break. This wasn't war. This was execution. "Fire at the next tank that passes. Then run. Do you hear me? Run and don't look back." Hamid nodded, tears streaming down his face. The rumble of tank treads grew louder. An Abrams rounded the corner, its turret swiveling toward their position. Hamid rose, aimed the RPG, and fired. The rocket streaked toward the tank. striking the frontal armor and exploding in a shower of sparks. The tank didn't even slow down. Its coaxial machine gun erupted, and Hamid was torn apart by a burst of 7.62 millimeters fire. Qusay didn't wait. He ran. Central Baghdad, 0730 hours. Captain Hendricks' tank rolled into Ferdo Square, the symbolic heart of Saddam's regime. The massive statue of Saddam Hussein loomed overhead, one arm raised in perpetual salute. Around the square, government buildings smoldered from airstrikes. Civilians peeked out from doorways, faces filled with shock and confusion. Reaper 6, this is Hammer Actual. Schwartz's voice came through. You just drove through 15 kilometers of enemy territory. You're in downtown Baghdad. Congratulations, Captain. You made history. Hendricks exhaled slowly, his hands trembling. Roger that, sir. What now? Now we hold. Reinforcements are coming. But Jake, you just proved Saddam was wrong. There's no stopping us now. As Hendricks looked around at the devastated city, the burning vehicles, the frightened faces, he felt no triumph, only exhaustion, and the sinking realization that taking Baghdad was the easy part. Holding it would be something else entirely. For days after Thunder Run, Ferdo Square had become the epicenter of a media spectacle. International journalists surrounded the towering statue of Saddam Hussein, their cameras trained on a U.S. Marine recovery vehicle as it wrapped steel cables around the dictator's bronze likeness. Iraqi civilians gathered, some cheering, others watching silently, unsure whether to celebrate or mourn. Captain Jake Hendricks stood beside his Abrams, now parked in a defensive position near the Palestine Hotel, and watched the scene unfold with a sense of profound disconnection. The war was supposed to be over. Saddam's regime had collapsed. The Republican Guard had disintegrated. And yet, something felt fundamentally wrong. Sir, Sergeant Martinez said, climbing out of the turret, "You seeing this?" Hendricks nodded. The statue swayed as the cables tightened. A moment later, it toppled forward, crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust. The crowd surged forward, some beating the fallen monument with shoes, others posing for photographs. It was the image the world wanted. Liberation, victory, the fall of tyranny. But Hendricks had seen what the cameras didn't show. He'd seen the looting that began within hours of the regime's collapse. Government buildings stripped bare, hospitals ransacked, museums pillaged, the Baghdad Zoo abandoned, its lions and tigers wandering through residential neighborhoods, fires burning out of control because there was no functioning fire department, sewage flooding streets because there was no municipal infrastructure. This is what winning looks like. Specialist Clark asked, his voice tinged with disillusionment. I don't know what this is, Hendricks admitted. Former Presidential Palace. April 10th, 2003. Lieutenant Colonel Eric Schwartz walked through the marble halls of Saddam's captured palace, his boots echoing in the empty corridors. The walls were covered in grandiose murals depicting Saddam as a warrior, a statesman, a father of a nation. Now those same walls bore bullet holes and graffiti left by American soldiers. Third ID was here, mission accomplished, and less printable sentiments. In what had once been Saddam's personal office, Schwartz found Major Riley studying a map of Baghdad spread across an ornate desk. Tom, Schwartz said, what's a sitrep? Riley looked up, his expression grim. We've got a problem, sir. Multiple problems, actually. First, we can't find Saddam. He's gone. Vanished. Intelligence thinks he fled north, maybe Tikrit, maybe out of the country entirely. That's not unexpected, Schwartz replied. What else? Looting. It's out of control. Civilian mobs are stripping everything that isn't nailed down. The Ministry of Oil is secure because we have orders to protect it. But the National Museum, the hospitals, universities, all getting ransacked. We don't have enough troops to stop it. Schwartz felt a headache building behind his eyes. What are higher headquarters saying? They're saying it's not our problem. We're war fighters, not police. They're saying Iraqi civilian authorities will restore order. What Iraqi civilian authorities? Schwartz snapped. We just decapitated the entire government. There's nobody left to restore order. Riley shrugged helplessly. I'm just relaying what I'm hearing, sir. The plan was regime change, not nation building. We were supposed to be greeted as liberators, remember? Flowers and parades. Schwartz looked out the window at the smoke rising from a dozen fires across the city. Yeah, I remember. Al-Rashid District, April 12, 2003. Captain Hendricks' platoon had been reassigned to patrol duties in eastern Baghdad, a densely populated neighborhood of apartment blocks, markets, and narrow streets, terrain utterly unsuited for tanks. The Abrams, designed for open desert warfare, felt like a clumsy giant in the urban environment. Reaper 6, this is Reaper 2, came the voice of Lieutenant Chris Wade, commanding the second tank in patrol. We got a crowd forming ahead, blocking the road. Looks like civilians, maybe 50 people, some of them armed. Hendricks raised his binoculars. The crowd was a mix of young men, some carrying AK-47s, others holding signs written in Arabic and English. One sign read, "Thank you for liberating us." Another read, "Now leave." "Hold position," Hendricks ordered. "Let me talk to them." He climbed down from the tank, his M4 carbine slung across his chest, and approached the crowd. An elderly man stepped forward, his face weathered by years of sun and hardship. "You are the American commander?" The man asked in heavily accented English. "I am," Hendricks replied. "What can I do for you?" The man gestured toward the ruined neighborhood behind him. "You can bring water, electricity, medicine. You destroyed our government. Now you must replace it." Hendricks felt the weight of the accusation. "We're soldiers, not engineers. We're doing what we can." "What you can?" The man's voice rose. "You had plans to destroy. Do you not have plans to rebuild? Did you think freedom means chaos? That liberation means watching our children drink filthy water." Another voice shouted from the crowd, younger, angrier. "You came for oil, for empire, not for us." The crowd surged forward. Hendricks's hand instinctively moved toward his rifle. Behind him, he heard Martinez chambering around in the tank's coaxial gun. "Stand down." Hendricks barked into his radio. Then to the crowd, "Please, we're not your enemy. Give us time." But time was something the Iraqis had already given. 3 weeks of war, and now the bitter reality of its aftermath. The elderly man shook his head sadly and turned away. The crowd dispersed, leaving Hendricks standing alone in the dusty street, feeling like he'd just lost a battle without firing a shot. Green Zone, April 15, 2003. The Coalition Provisional Authority was being established in what would become known as the Green Zone, a fortified district in central Baghdad housing the occupation government. Brigadier General David Caldwell, a career logistics officer suddenly thrust into the role of civil administrator, sat in a converted conference room, surrounded by maps, reports, and very bad coffee. "Gentlemen," he addressed the assembled officers, "we need to talk about the security situation, and the humanitarian situation, and the political situation. Basically, we need to talk about the fact that we're sitting on a powder keg." A Marine colonel spoke up. "Sir, with respect, we won the war. The Iraqi military is destroyed. Saddam is in hiding. Why are we still worried about security?" Caldwell pulled out a folder marked Intelligence Assessment, Confidential. "Because according to our analysts, we got approximately 400,000 Iraqi soldiers who just went home with their weapons. We disbanded the army without a plan for what to do with them. Now they're unemployed, angry, and armed. They won't fight." Another officer interjected. "They laid down their weapons. They surrendered." "They didn't surrender," Caldwell corrected. "They just went home. There's a difference." And now we're hearing rumors. Weapons caches being established, former Ba'ath Party officials organizing resistance cells, foreign fighters crossing the Syrian border. This isn't over. It's evolving. A CIA liaison officer, introduced only as Smith, leaned forward. "General, there's something else. We've been monitoring communications, and we're picking up chatter about something called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Apparently, some jihadist named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi is trying to turn this into a religious war. He's calling the invasion a crusade, rallying foreign fighters." Caldwell felt his stomach sink. How credible is this threat? Smith shrugged. Right now? Minimal. Zarqawi's got maybe 100 guys. But if we don't stabilize this country fast, if we don't give Iraqis a reason to support us instead of him, that number could grow. The room fell silent. The victory that seemed so complete just days ago was already fraying at the edges. Forward Operating Base, April 18th, 2003. Captain Hendricks sat in the mess tent, staring at a plate of reconstituted eggs and trying to process everything that had happened. His crew sat with him. Martinez, Clark, Ortiz, all of them looking older than they had 3 weeks ago. You think we'll go home soon? Clark asked. Hendricks wanted to lie, to offer reassurance, but he'd seen the deployment orders being drafted. No, I think we're here for a while. How long? I don't know. 6 months? A year? Martinez laughed bitterly. A year? In this place? Doing what? Babysitting a country that doesn't want us here. They do want us here, Ortiz said quietly. They just want us to do the impossible. Fix everything we broke, then leave immediately. Hendricks thought about the elderly man in Al-Rashid district, the pleading in his eyes, the anger in his voice. Maybe they're right to want that. Sir, Clark said carefully, are we the good guys here? It was the question Hendricks had been avoiding. In Kuwait, in the desert, during the Thunder Run, the moral calculus had seemed simple. Saddam was a tyrant. The Iraqi people deserved freedom. America was liberating an oppressed nation. But now, watching Baghdad burn while they sat behind concrete barriers, he wasn't sure anymore. I don't know, he admitted. I really don't know. Outside, the sun set over Baghdad, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Smoke from 100 fires drifted through the air. In the distance, sporadic gunfire echoed through the streets. Looters, criminals, or something else entirely. The war was over, but something darker was beginning. Something that didn't have a name yet. Something that would define the next 2 decades of violence, grief, and unanswered questions. And in a hideout somewhere in the ruins of Baghdad, a man named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi began recording a video message to his followers, declaring a new kind of war, one that would make the fall of Saddam seem like a prelude to a much longer nightmare. By July, the illusion of victory had completely dissolved. The scorching Iraqi summer brought temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit, power outages that lasted days, and a rising tide of violence that caught the American military completely unprepared. What had been sold to the world as a swift liberation was metastasizing into something far more complex and deadly, an insurgency. Captain Jake Hendricks' platoon had been in Iraq for 4 months straight. Their deployment extended indefinitely. The Abrams tanks that had crushed the Republican Guard in open desert were now lumbering targets in urban streets. Improvised explosive devices, IEDs, had become the insurgents' weapon of choice, crude but devastatingly effective against even the most advanced armor. Reaper 6, this is Reaper 3. Lieutenant Chris Wade's voice crackled over the radio. We got a possible IED grid coordinates follow. Requesting EOD support. Hendricks checked his map. The location was a busy intersection in Sadr City, a sprawling slum in eastern Baghdad that had become a hotbed of anti-American sentiment. Roger, Reaper 3. Hold position. EOD is en route. But EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, was overwhelmed. The insurgents were planting dozens of IEDs every night, ranging from artillery shells wired to cell phones to massive vehicle-borne explosives that could flip a tank. American forces were reacting, not anticipating, clearing routes that would be remined within hours, chasing ghosts who melted into the civilian population. Sergeant Martinez climbed out of the turret, sweat soaking through his uniform. Sir, we've been sitting in this heat for 3 hours. The guys are hurting. Hendricks knew. Heat exhaustion was becoming as much a threat as enemy fire. Soldiers were collapsing, suffering from dehydration and heat stroke. Medical evacuations were routine, and morale was cratering. Tell them to stay hydrated and stay alert, Hendricks said, the words sounding hollow even to him. We'll rotate back to base as soon as EOD clears this route. If they clear it, Martinez muttered. Green Zone, July 22nd, 2003. Lieutenant Colonel Eric Schwartz sat in a briefing room at Coalition Provisional Authority headquarters, listening to intelligence officers describe a deteriorating situation. Maps covered the walls, color-coded to indicate threat levels. Nearly a third of Baghdad was now shaded red. "Gentlemen," said Colonel James Hickey, the brigade's intelligence officer, "we're facing a multifaceted insurgency. Former regime loyalists, Sunni tribal militias, foreign jihadists, and now Shia militants loyal to Muqtada al-Sadr. They're not coordinated, but they don't need to be. They all want us gone." "How many insurgents are we talking about?" Schwartz asked. "Conservative estimate? 5,000 active fighters. But that number is growing weekly. For every insurgent we kill or capture, 2 more are recruited. We're feeding the cycle." Schwartz rubbed his temples. "What's the solution?" "There isn't one," Hickey said bluntly. "Not a military one, anyway. We need political reconciliation, economic reconstruction, jobs, infrastructure. Instead, we've disbanded the Iraqi army, fired every Ba'ath party member from government positions, and left 500,000 people unemployed and humiliated. We created this insurgency." A State Department advisor interjected. "That was policy decided at the highest levels. The Ba'athification was necessary." "Necessary," Schwartz interrupted. "We fired teachers, engineers, doctors, anyone who'd ever joined the party. In a totalitarian state where you join the party to get a decent job. Now those people are joining the insurgency or fleeing the country. Congratulations, we've destroyed Iraq's professional class." The room fell silent. Everyone knew he was right. The Coalition Provisional Authority, led by Ambassador Paul Bremer, had made a series of catastrophic decisions that transformed a defeated enemy into an embittered resistance. "What are our rules of engagement?" Schwartz asked. "Restrictive," Hickey replied. "We can't conduct raids without approval from higher headquarters. We can't fire unless fired upon, even in obviously hostile situations. We're trying to win hearts and minds while the insurgents are winning through intimidation and terror." "Then we're losing," Schwartz said quietly. Sadr City, August 7, 2003. Captain Hendricks led a patrol through Sadr City's labyrinthine streets, acutely aware of the hostile eyes watching from every window and rooftop. The neighborhood was controlled by the Mahdi army, a Shia militia loyal to Muqtada al-Sadr, a firebrand cleric who preached resistance to occupation. "Stay sharp," Hendricks said into his radio. "This place is a kill zone." The patrol consisted of 4 Humvees and 2 Abrams tanks, moving slowly through intersections choked with trash and abandoned vehicles. Children threw rocks at the convoy. Adults filmed the Americans with cell phone cameras, likely reporting their movements to militia commanders. "Sir," Specialist Clark said nervously, "I've got a bad feeling about this." Hendricks shared the feeling. The streets were too quiet. No market vendors. No traffic. Just empty buildings and shadows. Then, the first RPG streaked down an alleyway. The rocket-propelled grenade struck the lead Humvee's door, the explosion deafening. The vehicle swerved wildly, its driver wounded, and crashed into a concrete barrier. Immediately, machine gun fire erupted from multiple positions: rooftops, windows, doorways. "Contact!" Hendricks screamed. "All units, return fire." The convoy exploded into action. The Abrams tanks swiveled their turrets, coaxial guns hammering away at suspected enemy positions. Soldiers bailed out of Humvees, taking cover behind vehicles, returning fire with M4 rifles. Grenades detonated. Smoke filled the streets. "Reaper 6, this is Reaper 2. We're taking casualties. Need medevac urgent." Hendricks saw soldiers dragging wounded comrades to cover, blood pooling on the pavement. A young private, no older than 19, lay motionless, his body armor shredded by shrapnel. "Martinez, suppress that rooftop," Hendricks ordered. The main gun roared, a high-explosive round obliterating the building's top floor. But more insurgents appeared, firing AK-47 from behind civilian vehicles. The Americans were pinned down, outnumbered, fighting in an environment where distinguishing combatants from civilians was nearly impossible. "Air support." Hendricks yelled into his radio. "We need air support now." Negative, Reaper 6. Came the reply. Rules of engagement prohibit close air support in civilian areas without visual confirmation of enemy forces. We're being shot at, Hendricks shouted. Isn't that confirmation enough? Negative. Stand by. The firefight lasted 30 minutes. By the time Apache helicopters arrived and forced the insurgents to withdraw, 3 Americans were dead, 7 wounded, and an entire city block was in flames. The patrol limped back to base, traumatized and furious. That night, Hendricks sat in his quarters and wrote a letter to the parents of Private First Class Daniel Torres, the 19-year-old who died in the ambush. He tried to find words that meant something, that justified the sacrifice, that explained why their son had died on a street corner in a city most Americans couldn't find on a map. He couldn't, so he wrote the truth. Your son died serving his country. He was brave. He is missed. It felt inadequate because it was. Green Zone, October 2003. Brigadier General David Caldwell attended a secure video conference with Pentagon leadership. The screen showing faces of senior officers and civilian officials 7,000 miles away in Washington. General Caldwell, said a faceless voice, give us an assessment of the security situation in Iraq. Caldwell chose his words carefully. Sir, we're facing a full-spectrum insurgency. Attacks on coalition forces have increased 300% since May. IED incidents are up 400%. We're losing soldiers every day, and we're not making progress on reconstruction. What's the problem? The voice asked, impatience evident. The problem is we invaded with a force size to defeat an army, not occupy a country. We need more troops, more resources, more time, and we need a political strategy that gives Iraqis a stake in their own future. That's not what we're hearing from Ambassador Bremer. Another voice interjected. He's optimistic about progress. Caldwell bit back the sarcastic response. Bremer, isolated in the Green Zone, had no idea what was happening outside the concrete walls. Sir, with respect, the ambassador's optimism is not shared by the soldiers getting shot at. We're losing this war. We're not at war, General. We're conducting stability operations. Tell that to the dead soldiers. The line went silent. Then, General, your concerns are noted, but the policy is set. Make it work. The screen went black. Caldwell sat alone in the darkened room, feeling the weight of impossible expectations. Make it work. As if willpower and determination could overcome strategic blunders and political myopia. Forward Operating Base, December 2003. Captain Jake Hendricks stood on the perimeter wall of the base, watching the sun set over Baghdad for what felt like the 1,000th time. His deployment had been extended again, 12 months now, with no end in sight. Half his original crew had been rotated out due to injuries or psychological breakdowns. He'd attended memorials for soldiers he'd known, written letters to families he'd never met, and watched the mission spiral into futility. Sergeant Martinez joined him, also staring at the horizon. You hear the news? They caught Saddam, pulled him out of a spider hole near Tikrit. Hendricks nodded. He'd seen the footage. The disheveled dictator, beard unkempt, surrendering without resistance. The man who'd once mocked American armor was now a prisoner, headed for trial and eventual execution. You think that changes anything? Martinez asked. No, Hendricks said quietly. The insurgency isn't about Saddam anymore. It's about us, about occupation, about humiliation. We could parade him through the streets, and it wouldn't matter. We're the enemy now. They stood in silence, watching the city glow with fires and distant explosions. Somewhere out there, insurgents were planting IEDs, planning ambushes, recording propaganda videos. The war that was supposed to end in weeks had become an endless grind of patrols, firefights, and funerals. Sir, Martinez said, was it worth it? Hendricks thought about the Thunder Run, the euphoria of reaching Baghdad, the statue falling in Ferdo Square, the promises of liberation and democracy. And he thought about the bodies, the devastation, the lies. I don't know, he admitted. Ask me in 20 years. But even then, he suspected, the answer would still be unclear.